All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Barakach, Badash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations be unto the Akim. I heard pushing this gospel in truth and in sincerity to the best of their ability given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. And we out here another week, man, through the grace and mercy of the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, and His only beloved begotten Son, Yahweh Shai, to continue to preach His gospel, right, which is His good news, man. And the good news is that, hey, this place is going down, right, and we don't got too much longer, man, right, for this society, to continue to stand, right. It's going down, right, as we, as the days going on. America is continuing to be destroyed, right. Esau Edom, his rulership is coming to an end, right. We are at the absolute end of this devil's rulership, man, right. I want to start with this in Ezekiel the 7th chapter, and I'll start at verse 5. It says, "Thus saith Yahweh, by Hashem Yahweh Shai, and evil and only evil, behold, is come," right? Because as we read, right, in 2nd Ezra the 14th chapter, right, that the days are only going to continue to get worse, right? 2nd Ezra 14 to 16, right? Greater evils than those that which we see now, right, are going to happen hereafter, right? Roughly paraphrasing, right? Meaning the times are only going to get more evil, right? Which is also why it tells you in Ephesians the 5th chapter, right, that we're to walk circumspectly, right? Not as fools, but as wise, meaning to look around and pay attention, right? Don't be like these people out here, man, constantly looking down at their phone, walking around. They don't pay attention, man, right? And it goes, past, right? Not just looking down at your phone, but it goes into, paying attention to what's going on in your city, right? Going on in, your community, your city, your state, right? Your region of the world, if you will, right? Just to see what's going on and be updated on how the economy is moving, right? What ultimately is going to affect your way of life, right? Is what you should be ultimately paying attention to, man. As much as possible. And again, we understand that this current rulership, right, is going down drastically. Verse 6, it says, Ezekiel 7 and 6, it says, "The end is come, the end is come. It watches for thee, behold, it is come," right? We're at the end of this wicked and adulterous and evil rulership, man. And we'll jump back to this, but I want to jump to Matthew's the 24th chapter, right? Because again, we were given signs, right, that give us the understanding of the times that we're in, right? Matthew's 24, and I'll start at verse 3, right? It says, "And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" Right? They're ultimately inquiring, right, of Yahweh Shai, right? Well, how do we know, right? How do we know that we're at the end, And he gave them a few signs, right? Verse 4, it says, "And Yahweh Shai answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am anointed, and shall deceive many." And we see that today, right? One in particular, will be Nate of the IUIC, Bishop Nate of the IUIC, right? All the different, him coming in on the Passover on a horse, right? When Yahweh Shai rode on, on an ass, right? A mule, a donkey, man, which is smaller, right? And of less in stature than a horse, right? And then on top of that, right, he, ultimately painted himself, on a magazine, of having fire and ice, right, in each hand. Fire on one side, ice on the other side, right? As if he's got, spiritual power or, whatnot, man, But yet the doctrine that he preaches, right, is ultimately, it's lies, right? Because the scriptures say a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump, right? And he's got a lot of leaven, right, within his doctrine, man, right? Which again proves that he ultimately preaches lies, and as well as these many other groups, right, that do that, right? ISUPK, that said John the Baptist wasn't in the truth. You got the former heads of Sakari, Alazar, Hakkad, Hassad, right, when they were with, Sakari, ultimately said that Yahweh Shai isn't to be worshipped, right? And look at where that camp is at now, right? Alazar is back in the world, wants nothing to do with the Israelite movement, and then you have Hakkad and Hassad, which created, their own group called Genesis, right? And now they're saying that the heathens, right, are ultimately going to be able to be delivered, right, with the elect of the nation of Israel, which is not the case, right? Nowhere in the scriptures does it say that, you know. So they're preaching wayward ass doctrines, man, right? Deceiving you people, and really it's all about the money, right? That's what they're all worried about, right? Making merchandise of you, getting your money, you know. And again, right, the scriptures say, you know, that when you come into the knowledge of this truth, man, you know, you gotta, you know, ultimately, you know, try the spirits by the spirits, man, right? And look at their fruits, you know, look at their works, man, right? A lot of these camps, right, they don't go out, right? A lot of heads of these camps, they don't go out to the highways and byways, which we're commanded to do, you know. Again, and a lot of the things that these men have said, right, the elder apostles, right, immediately, right, go and cut, and, you know, through the scriptures, through the words of Yahweh Shemel Shah, right, they cut their doctrine, man, right, and show you that it's nothing but lies, show you that it's not rooted and grounded in truth, you know. You got a lot of false prophets out here, man. The elder Apostle Gabar made that statement that you got more false prophets than you do true prophets, and that's 100% correct, you know. Just like when Yahweh Shai was on the scene, right, he only gave the truth, right, the proper understanding of the scriptures unto who? Unto the disciples, man, you know, which is symbolic for the elect. The elect would have the truth, you know, in these days, man, you know. Everybody else is ultimately, you know, listening to and following lies, you know. But I'll continue on, right? Matthew 24, which is, that's a sign, right? All of that, right? The true prophets being on the scene, right? That's a sign, right? The false prophets, right? And the true prophets, right? Ultimately identifying and showing you who the false prophets are. Those are all signs, man, you know. But I continue on. Matthew 24, verse 6, it says, ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, right? What we see today, right? You got that war that has started, you know, it's been going on for the past 2 years now. I think it's 2 years now, going on 3 years, right? The war with Russia and Ukraine, right? As well as I think a year and some change, or almost 2 years for the war between Israel and Gaza, right? And now you just had a 12-day war between America, and Iran, right? America and Israel against Iran, right? And now we're looking at another war popping out between America and Iran individually. You know, America is basically threatening, you know, Iran. You know, America went in and took Venezuela, you know, the leader of Venezuela, and took over, you know, the oil reserves, right? So we have all these different skirmishes, these wars and rumors of wars that are taking place as of right now, right? Which are heavy, right? Very, very important situations that are taking place, right, between America and the rest of these different nations, right? America and America's current allies, which it's looking like the majority of America's allies have turned its back on it, but except for Israel, you know, and those who are you know, have been set up, like Argentina, you know, so on and so forth, which we know the leader of Argentina is a small hat, you know. So it's like those small number of allies, you know, are still with America, but nonetheless, majority of America's allies have ultimately given up on America, man. You know, but it's basically America and America's few allies versus the rest of the world, basically. You know, but it says, and ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Right? All these things are, you know, according to prophecy, man. These are all different signs that we're to ultimately pay attention to, right, which give us the understanding of the times that we're in. Right? It says, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences, right, and earthquakes in diverse places, right? And we got a famine is about to, you know, grasp the whole world, right? Especially here in America with this whole, you know, the snow that came through. I was reading an article, I want to say a few days ago, you know, that a huge, I think 1/3 of, you know, the farmers in, you know, Florida, you know, had all their crops, right, completely just, you know, destroyed, right, by this, you know, Arctic blast that was coming through on the East Coast, you know, just killing all their crops, man, which is huge because, and you know, a lot of that, you know, they ultimately count on, you know, selling their crops and making it through the winter time and stuff like that so they can continue on, you know. But again, a lot of their crops were destroyed, you know. That means a lot of their money, which means a lot of their product is not going to be put out into these, you know, on the shelves, man, you know, which means less and less food. You know, I've talked about, you know, because we have yet to really see the huge and major impacts of a lot of these truckers, you know, being taken off of, you know, off the streets, you know. But soon we're gonna see that impact, man. You know, they're giving certain drivers, you know, English proficiency test, and if you fail that English proficiency test, and they're taking away your license, and you're no longer able to drive. You know, and they're cracking down on, you know, a lot of these truck drivers, man. You know, more and more truck drivers are being taken off of the roads, right? But it says and pestilences, and we're seeing that there's a lot of these different you know, they're doing like this I can't remember which way. It's like another flu, if you will, that's been going around heavy. You know, I was looking up something earlier that had talked about that. So like, let me pull it up. I'm gonna try to pull it up on like the Newsbreak app and see if that article that I had seen about that, right, is ultimately gonna pull up. Because again, right, there's a lot of like pestilences and stuff like that have been going out heavy, right? People getting sick. Let me see if I can. I don't want to spend too much time trying to look for it, you know. But yeah, you got a lot of pestilences going out. People getting sick at all-time high, and looking like they're trying to, you know, basically you know, start another scamdemic, you know. I'm not able to find it. It might have been on a different maybe on like you know, end time headlines, or, you know, the people's voice.tv, you know, where I've seen it, you know. But nonetheless, right, again, it's going out, man. People are getting sick, you know. It's like, but it says also what it says in earthquakes in diverse places, and I was looking at that earlier as well, right? I looked up on Google. It says the most recent earthquakes, right? Most recent earthquakes, and it says February 2nd at 8:01, you had a 4.2, San Ramon, California. February 8th, which is today, you had a 5.7 in Pica, Chile. At 5 a.m. today, at 5.5 in Cuba. Yesterday at 8:37 p.m., you had a 2.9 in South Carolina. At 2:20 p.m. 2 days ago, you had a 5.9 in Tual City, Maluku, Indonesia. A 3.5 on the 5th in Utah. Another one in Indonesia. Another one in New Zealand. Another one in Myanmar. 5.8 Myanmar. And it continues to go on, right? So it's been, again, in their diverse places: Indonesia, Utah, South Carolina, California, Cuba, Chile, you know, so on and so forth. This is all happening. These are all different signs, man, right? And they're happening back to back to back, and they're not small, right? A 5.8 is not small, right? A 5.2, a 4 point something is not. They're not small, right? Those are still earthquakes that can cause, you know, damage, right? Granted, we've had, you know, and seen, right, like Istanbul, right, Turkey, right, they had like a 7.8 or something like that hit, you know, that killed thousands, tens of thousands, right? You had one in Afghanistan that killed tens of thousands, you know. Recently, in the last like 3 or 4 years, you know, we've been seeing a shit ton of earthquakes that have been causing major damages. These are all signs, man, right, showing you that we're at the end. Right, we're at the end of this current and wicked and evil rulership, where wickedness, right, has polluted the whole earth, right, pursuing the second Esdras, the 15th chapter. You know, you got moles walking around like this park that I'm at. You know, it's got two sides, right? On the other side of the main road that's right here, right, you got the sports side, right, where they got the, you know, open fields, soccer fields, you know what I mean? You got the basketball courts, tennis courts, volleyball courts, swimming pools, so on and so forth. Over there in the fields right now, you got a whole bunch of kickball teams over there set up, right? And when you go over there, it's mainly fucking moles, man. You know? Mainly fucking moles and lesbos and whatnot, man. Women trying to be dudes and dudes trying to be men, and they all being all flamboyant, you know, and whatnot. That shit's vexing as hell, man. You know, because really we in hell, you know, so it's vexing, man. You know, you got these little YNs, man, toting these guns, man. You can't say, or I mean, you just might take a glance and these niggas over here fucking goddamn, getting what you staring at. Like, nigga, get the fuck out of here, man. It's because they're raised right by women, right? There's no men in the homes, man. And that all comes because of Esau Edom, right? Sirach the 2nd chapter. It's like Sirach the 10th chapter. And verse 2, it says, as the judge of the people is himself, so are his officers, and what manner of the man of the ruler of the city is, such are all they that dwell therein. So it all starts from the top down, man. Right? We understand that the world is given into the hand of the wicked, right? And which is why you see wickedness at such an all-time high, because of who's in charge. And again, right, as we're going through these different signs, right, we're seeing that we're at the end of his rulership, man. We got the last two major prophecies to ultimately take place, right? Which are what? Jacob's trouble, which we're in now, and World War III, right? But let me grab this. Matthew 24, right? And in that order, right? In Matthew 24 and verse 8, it says, all these are the beginning of sorrows, right? And again, right, it's going to continue to get worse, right? 2nd Esdras 14 and verse 16 tells you that, as a matter of fact, I quoted it earlier. Spirit wants it to come out. Let me grab it out. This is 2nd Esdras 14 verse 16. It says, for yet greater evils than those which thou hast seen happen shall be done hereafter, right? The times that we're in are only going to continue to get worse. And again, the warning is going out, right? Yahweh, Bahashim Yahweh Shai, right? The Heavenly Father, right? Through his only beloved begotten Son, right? Who the word ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, his true name is Yahweh Shai, is through the prophets giving you that warning, right? Telling you what's about to unfold, telling you to get ready, right? Because Esau's about to move, man. Again, we're in Jacob's trouble, right? Which is, again, as you read in Jeremiah 30 as well as Daniel's the 12th chapter, right? It's going to be like a time like no other. No time in history is going to equal, what is approaching, and we're going to continue to blow the trumpet on that, right? Because this is what's relevant. This is what's about to take place, I had seen, an article on the Newsbreak app yesterday. Actually, let me grab it. I have it pulled up right here. I actually got two on the same matter, right? It says I'll grab this one. They're both going to the same thing. But let me grab this one. It says, it's on the Newsbreak app. It says, appeals court greenlights Trump admin policy of detaining undocumented immigrants without opportunity to seek release. And we understand that, he's been trying to, Trump and his administration have basically been trying to get rid of, habeas corpus, right? Which means that if you ultimately get detained, right, you're able to challenge, right, your detention, right? Whether it was valid, right? Whether it was lawful, or whatnot, with ICE, right? The federal agents going, and coming, going, right? As JD Vance said, right? They're going to be coming door to door, right? As they continue to do that, they're implementing, right, laws that have been put in place decades ago, right? And they're now utilizing them, right? In this article, there's a quote that was said. It says right here, as you read down the article, it says that prior, and this is a quote, it says that prior administration decided to use less than their full enforcement authority. Does not mean they lack the authority to do more, right? It says under prior administration, non-citizens who had entered the U.S. illegally were later apprehended away from the border and had no criminal history were able to be released on bond while their immigration cases unfolded. That long-standing policy contrasted with how immigrants who were detained at the border were treated. Those individuals could be placed in expedited removal proceedings without the ability to seek release on bond. So those who were, caught at the border, right, were ultimately apprehended and sent back. No bond, no nothing, no due process, just sent back, right? Now they're saying that those who have come in illegally and were able to set up shop here, live here for decades, now they're able to snatch them up, right, into without due process, right? Without being able to bond out or again challenge their detention, are now going to be apprehended, man. You know, and they're not going to be able to challenge, right, their apprehension, you know, their detention, right? It says Judge Dana Douglas, an appointee of former President Joe Biden, warned in a dissenting opinion that the majority ruling could result in detention without bond for 2 million non-citizens in the U.S., right? This is what's going on, right? So as you see, you know, this you know, the EP Steam files ultimately coming out, right? We were telling y'all that Esau is going to, you know, crack down even harder, right? Because he, you know, he's first and foremost, Yahweh Shemel Shai is revealing all this information, right? We read that in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3, right? That the man of sin, the son of perdition, will be revealed, which is also another sign, right? And we have that sign. He's being revealed at an all-time high, right? There's nothing that he can do to stop this information from coming out, right? So the only thing that he can do is to say, hey, fuck it, we gotta, you know, we gotta roll out. We gotta roll up on these people, man, right? And establish their NWO, you know? This is what he's going to do. You know, it says the government today asserts the authority and mandate to detain millions of non-citizens in the interior, right? Which goes back to what Trump had said, right, when he went down to El Salvador, right? When he went down there, it was recorded that he sat there and said, oh, now it's the time, you know, to come after the homeborn, you know? Those who were born here or those who came over and set up shop and birthed kids here and they became, you know, legal citizens, so on and so forth. Those are who he's coming after, you know? The Israelites, the so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, right? It starts with, you know, the northern tribes, right? You so-called Latinos, the so-called natives, right? And it ultimately moves, you know, to the southern tribes, you so-called blacks, man, right? And now we're seeing he's opened up the door for all of, you know, for being able to come after the northern and the southern tribes, man. You know, it says the government today asserts the authority, and this again, this is a quote, the government today asserts the authority and mandate to detain millions of non-citizens in the interior, some of them present here for decades, on the same terms as if they were apprehended at the border, meaning you're not going to be able to get no due process, man, right? And see, this is how they ultimately bypass the fact of trying to get rid of habeas corpus and it not being allowed, because this was already implemented, right? These are part of the distinctions of the laws of immigration, right? Which, you know, there's you know, 8, you know, distinctions of the law of immigration, right? As you get into them, right? Immigrant versus non-immigrant, you know, admissible versus not admissible, you know, and so on and so forth, man. You know, and it gets heavy, you know. And I actually asked a question with chat, right? Like, how is that going to, you know, affect you so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans today, right? But it says, no matter that this newly discovered mandate arrives without historical precedent and in the teeth of one of the core distinctions of the immigration law, right? So let's go to that question that I asked, right? I actually asked 2 questions, right? It says the first question was, what's the major distinctions in immigration law, right? Again, they give you a multiple, right? The first one being immigrant versus non-immigrant intent. Second one, admission versus status. Third one, visa versus status. The fourth, law presence versus lawful presence versus unlawful presence. The fifth one, which is the one I want to read, it says civil versus criminal immigration law, right? And then he got 2 more, right? And inadmissibility versus deportability. The 7th is discretionary versus mandatory outcomes. And 8, affirmative versus defensive processes. Now I want to jump up to the 5th one, right? It says immigration, again, civil versus criminal immigration law, right? It says immigration violations are usually civil, not criminal. Deportation is not a criminal punishment, which is why the system has fewer constitutional protections than criminal court. Crimes intersect with immigration through grounds of removability and inadmissibility. A misdemeanor under the state law can be an aggravated felony in immigration law because immigration uses its own definitions that ignore common sense. So they're going to ultimately take, you know, a small, and you might have, you know, did a California roll when you came up to a stop sign, where in the state you're not allowed to do that, you know, like here in Arizona, right? You technically have to come to, you know, a full stop, you know, before you roll on. But they do, yeah, you know, they got something that people do, it's called a California roll, right? Where you basically roll up to the stop sign. You don't come to 100% stop. You just slow down, right, to where you're creeping, and then you just keep going, right? Hey, that can be seen, right, by immigration as a reason to pull you over, check your status, you know, and if your status isn't, you know, in admission, right, what they say, you have to have an application in and it's processing, right, basically in admission, right, in order for you to be, you know, cool. You know, but even then, they're still snatching people up who are going to their court cases, who are going to, you know what I mean? So they're basically just snatching you up for any reason, man. You know, calling you a criminal, calling you a problem to society, and who is it on? It's on you so-called Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, mainly the northern tribes as of right now. But soon it's going to be the so-called, you know, so-called blacks going through it as well. You know, which we're already seeing, you know, certain videos of them coming after so-called blacks, man. You know, it's just gonna turn up. You know, it's gonna continue to increase, right? That's good. That's the fifth, right? Now I asked my question, right? It says my second question. Right, it says, how will these core distinctions be used against blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans by ICE today? Right? It says ICE doesn't need overt racism to produce racially skewed outcomes. The system already does the work for them. The core legal distinctions you asked about function like levers, and those levers are pulled hardest where history, policing, and poverty already concentrate pressure. Black, Latino, and Native communities, right? Most of these police officers, right? They live in the so-called white neighborhoods, but where do they work? Right, in the so-called Blacks, Hispanics, and Native American communities, man. It says start with. Actually, you know, we'll drop down. Actually, we'll read a couple of these. There's like 4 or 5 of them. Right? We'll read the first few, right? It says, start with admission versus status, right? ICE targets people whose status is fragile or ambiguous. Communities with higher rates of mixed status families, informal employment, or historic under documentation are easier to fracture. And which is why you see them coming after, you know, like the Home Depots and whatnot and snatching them up, you know? It says a traffic stop or minor arrest becomes a status check. Once status is questioned, the burden shifts to the individual to prove legality, often without counsel, documents, or time, right? So you're just going to be snatched up at that point, man, you know? Then civil versus criminal law, one of the sharpest tools, because immigration enforcement is civil. ICE can detain without the protections you'd expect in criminal court. Meaning, again, you're not going to be able to, you know, habeas corpus doesn't apply to you. You can't challenge your detention, right? It says no guaranteed attorney, lower evidentiary standards, long detention without charges. Black immigrants are hit especially hard here because over-policing feeds criminal databases ICE taps into. The crime to deportation pipeline doesn't care whether the original offense was minor, dismissed, or decades old, so they don't care. You know, this is how Esau is moving now, man. You know, and it's only going to continue to get worse. He's only going to continue to press harder and harder, right, to come after you Israelites. And this right here, right, is an indication that, hey, war on you Israelites is taking place, right? Esau has, you know, is waging war on you Israelites, right? That's prophecy, right? Let's go to Revelations 11, or it's like 12. In verse 17, it says, and the dragon, which the dragon goes back to Esau, Edom, right? The self-proclaimed so-called white man today, right? It says, and the dragon was wroth with the woman. That woman, right? When you jump to the top, right, of this chapter, right? That woman is going into you Israelites, right? You Israelites, you so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, right? As well as you Israelite foreigners, right? Yeah, come. Right, it says, and the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, man. Went to make war, right? And Esau went and switched his, you know, from the Department of Defense to Department of War, from Secretary of Defense to Secretary of War. Esau is in war mode right now, man. And who is he coming after? He's coming after you Israelites, man, right? This is why we, you know, are constantly, you know, blowing the whistle, right, on all these different, you know, policies and bills that are being passed and you know, introduced, right? Because again, it tells you, hey, Esau about to really come down. All this information that's coming out on him, his dirty laundry being, you know, aired out, right? You best believe he's gonna do something, man, right? And it's gonna happen soon, right? The Minneapolis, Minnesota, right? That was just a a foreshadow of what's to come, right? This bill, the Fifth Circuit, right, which ultimately deals with Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, right, is going to allow them, to ultimately come and apprehend the people, right? This is another, Esau is basically chipping at the bit, right? Minneapolis, Minnesota, right? That happened, and now he's saying, okay, next phase, we're gonna detain these people that have been here for decades, and we're gonna hold them basically indefinitely. We're gonna hold them indefinitely. And I wouldn't be too surprised if Esau ultimately, puts, or gives them the option, right? The only option, basically making them, take their charagma in order to stay in the United States, man, right? Because we understand that that's how the devil works. That's how he's trying to move, right? He wants everybody to take this RFID micro SIM. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to participate in society, right? Like we've seen the UK as well as Mexico doing with this digital ID, right? They're now making the digital ID mandatory, right? In order for you to be able to participate in society, you're going to have to take it, which is a prelude or a precursor, right, to the RFID micro SIM, because you can lose your phone, you can lose, your which now makes it to where you don't have access to your digital ID, right? So they're gonna say, hey, this is the first step, and we see all the flaws. Hey, you're just gonna have to take the RFID, put it in your body, right? Because then it's something you can't lose, something you can't, it'll just walk up, scan, boom, and you got all your information. They're already walking up, scanning, ICE is going and scanning around people's faces, which is gathering data as well, This is what they're doing, man. This is the times that we're in, But Esau is making that war, man. He's coming after you Israelites, right? He's setting up the different policies and utilizing different policies that were instituted decades ago, It says, and the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of the Most High and have the testimony of Yahushua Hamashiach, right? So again, right, it's not just you Israelites; it's those that preach this word, right? That's a main focus, man. Those who are continuing to blow the whistle on the, this damn devil through the Spirit and power of the Heavenly Father Yahweh and His only beloved begotten Son, those who are out here teaching and preaching this Bible, this gospel, that are against his society, right? Those are who he's coming after as well, man. Which goes back to that persecution that is written in the Bible to happen, right? Those who are again against this devil's society, man. But let me go back to this that question that I asked, right? In the chat GPT, right? It says, let me drop down a little bit, right? It says consider lawful versus unlawful presence. So this is where technicalities become weapons. A missed notice, a wrong address, a misfiled form, suddenly unlawful presence accrues. ICE doesn't have to argue morality. The clock does the damage. Latino immigrants are disproportionately affected, right? Because seasonal work, visa overstays, and family-based delays create more chances for time-based traps, right? So they're banking on that, man. It says, finally, affirmative versus defensive posture. ICE often waits until someone is already in crisis, detained, arrested, separated, before the law even allows them to ask for relief. Defensive cases are harder to win, faster to lose, and emotionally destabilizing. This is devastating communities with limited access to legal aid, where people learn their rights only after the system has momentum. So you're screwed, man. By the time they apprehend you, by the time they start putting you through the ringer and it's processing you and putting you in, one of these detention centers, right? Because we understand that Trump and his administration, ICE, right, ICE, right, is going around and buying all these different vacant or abandoned warehouses and turning them into detention centers. They have one in Surprise here in Arizona, man. That they're ultimately setting up. You got protesters and whatnot, but it's already bought, it's already purchased. A 400,000, right, square foot warehouse that they're going to turn into a detention center, man. And that's where they're going to put these people, man. It says, here's the uncomfortable truth beneath all of this. ICE doesn't need to target race. It targets instability, visibility, and record density, which they do come after race, right? The Supreme Court, right, ultimately passed, right? I think it was in California, and we know that they're utilizing that basically everywhere. But the Supreme Court allowed them to basically come after people based on their occupation, their language, and what they look like, their skin color, right? Opening the door for Esau to be fucking racist, man. You know, which he is a fucking racist. You know, that opened up the door, right? So it is based on, you know, your actual race, right? But it's saying it doesn't need to be, right? They don't need to, but they are, you know. It says the system presents itself as neutral, technical, procedural. In practice, it behaves like an amplifier, turning historical inequality into legal outcomes with a clean paper trail and no fingerprints. That's how they want it, right? It says once you see that, immigration enforcement stops looking like border control and starts looking like internal sorting. And that's not an accident of the law. It's one of its long-standing functions, you know. That's these laws and policies that, you know, we're seeing him, you know, now saying, oh, well, you know, the past administration, they didn't use the full extent of their force, right? Even though they could have, but we are now, right? We're utilizing it now. The fucking damn devils, man, you know, fucking damn devils. Again, this is gonna allow for him to really crack down even harder, right? As we read in Revelation 12:12, it says, therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. Esau knows he only got a short time, right? We're seeing, again, all this information is being revealed. You can go look at it, right? You can go to the Department of Justice, right, / EP Steam, you know, and they'll give you all the data sets, right? You start getting into like data set 9 and more, right? You start getting into conversations, right, of, you know, between, you know, different government officials, different CEOs, different celebrities, and so on and so forth, right? You start getting into those after like the data set 9 on forward, right? Data set 9, 10, 11, 12, so on and so forth. You start getting into pictures, you know, that are being revealed and being, you know, put out there, right? Which I haven't seen it myself, but apparently there's one of Jay-Z who ultimately, you know, was doing a safari, right? From what they were saying, right? Doing a safari island type shit with children. And the elites would go there and would hunt, you know, kind of like that movie Apex, right? With Bruce Willis, right? When you go into that movie, right, Apex, they basically had it to where they were sending these, you know, people on this island and would send bounty hunters and whatnot after them, right? And they would just, you know, have a blast, right, going and killing these people, man, you know? This is what they did, right? Go and watch that movie, right? Apex. This is what the shit that they did. And we'll basically send them to an island where they can't run. They can't get off of it. You know, they're basically screwed. They left to fend for themselves, man. You know? This is how these damn devils think. And this is what, you know, they've been doing, right? And again, I haven't seen the actual, you know, the piece of information myself, right, on Jay-Z, right? So I don't know how true it is, right? But it's not far-fetched. All this information that's coming out, right? It's in these files, man, you know. And Esau's got to make a move, try to cover it up, try to get you people off of that, you know. You know, you got the Super Bowl, right, which is you know, you best believe usually the halftime shows, man, they're very demonic, right? They're very evil, you know. Very demonic, very evil, the halftime shows and whatnot, man. And again, it's what bread and circus, man. Right, to get you people distracted. So you best believe while you people are watching the Super Bowl, you're distracted, you know, doing like little birthdays and gatherings and whatnot. Esau gonna be working behind the scenes, man. You know, he gonna be working behind the scenes, passing these different laws and policies and moving a certain way. Hey, they might even, again, during the Super Bowl, they might come into these houses and snatch a lot of y'all up during the Super Bowl, man. And it's gonna be what? It's not gonna be televised. It's not gonna be, you know, recorded. You know, people aren't going to know until, you know, maybe, you know, a couple days later, you know, that homes are being raided during the Super Bowl. Again, it's not far-fetched, man, right? Just speculation, speaking as a man, right? We don't know if he's going to do that, but he very well could, man. You know, this is why it's very important for you to take heed unto the prophets, man, right? Take heed unto the words of the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, through his only beloved begotten Son, you know? Which utilizes the prophets, right, to speak unto you people, man. We're in some very deadly times, man. Very, very evil times. You know, as we read, and I'm going to read the Ephesians 5th chapter as I quoted it earlier. Ephesians 5 and verse 15, it says, See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. We're in some very evil times, man. Right? And a lot of you, man, a lot of you so-called Hispanics, so-called Latinos, so-called blacks, hey, Esau finna come after y'all, man. You know? Even the men of the Lord, right? Esau's gonna come after the men of the Lord and snatch up, because those that are gonna be in the detention centers are not just gonna be, you know, regular old Israelites. You're gonna have the men of the Lord in there as well. You know? Pursuant to St. John, chapter 15, and verse 20 being the point, it says, remember the word that I said unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord. If they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they have kept my sayings, they will keep yours also. Right? Right? Persecution is gonna take place, man. You know? Because as it says right here, verse 21, but all these things they will do unto you for my name's sake, because they know not him that sent me. Because we preach this gospel, we preach this truth, you know, we're completely against, right, this society, right? We're against Moism, you know, meaning H-O to the M-O, you know, or L-E to the B-O, or L-E-S to the B-O, right? We're against all that shit, man. We're against wickedness, you know? We're against evil, you know? Through the grace and mercy of Yahweh Shem Shah, man, you know, we're constantly vexed at the wickedness that's being done here, man. Like Lot was, you know. Was that 2 Peter 2:7, right? It says, and deliver just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked. Filthy conversation. When you go into that word conversation, it goes back to conduct, right? How the people act, right? Scriptures also say that the conversation of fools is irksome, because they don't talk about, you know, the scripture. They don't talk about wisdom. They don't talk about righteous shit. They talk about bugged out shit, man. You know, so you sitting there, you getting vexed because, you know, you're dealing with dudes at your work and they talking about some vain ass shit. Really ain't got no importance. You know, it's not gonna benefit them. They're just complaining. They're talking about shit. They talk about each other. You know, that shit is vexing. You know, it's like my freaking mustache is going to my nose. It's like, right? That shit is vexing, man. You know, people talking about, you know, man, I had a coworker that was talking about committing adultery. Like, knew the dude that he, you know, that the woman, right? He knew the man, right? Was cool with him. Was still talking about it. I'm just sitting there like, man, in my head, I'm just like, what the hell? Like, I'm just trying to do my own thing, man. Go on a different side, you know, do my own work and shit like that. And here he come, you know, talking about that shit. This shit's vexing as hell, man. I was getting upset, you know. I even recently just had a family member, right? He moved down here, and you know, I went to go, you know, I ain't seen him in years, you know, went to go say something, you know, and say what's up, and took him out for a drive, and I told him, hey man, you know, just don't go over here. The young niggas over here, man, they just, you know, they run that part, man. Just stay away from that. He was telling me that he was, you know, that he's comfortable with that. Like, he, you know, he wants to be around the niggerish shit, and that's his words, you know. His words talking about, you know where I was at. You know, I walk outside and I seen somebody get shot. You know, dude was walking away, and, you know, I just went back inside. And I'm telling him, like, oh, you comfortable with that? He's like, yeah, you know, I'm comfortable. You know, I've always been around niggerish shit. You know, I like being around niggerish shit. That's exactly what that shit had me look at him like, man, you about as dumb as a fucking rock, man. A rock probably got you know, more intelligence than this nigga, man. Why would you want to be around that shit? You know? But they see that's our people, man. You know, our people love to be around that shit, man, right? Which is gonna be, that's gonna be their downfall, man. But the men of the Lord, those who truly trust and believe and love Yahweh Bashim Shah, we don't want to be around that shit. We trying to get up out of that shit. We want this place to go down, man, right? 2 Peter 2 and verse 8 says, for the righteous man dwelling among them in seeing and hearing vex his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. You know, unlawful deeds, man. Y'all want to continue to be wicked? Hey, that's cool. Do that shit over there. Don't bring that shit over here, man. You know, this is why we're constantly throwing up, you know, curses on this place, that Yahweh Bashim Shah bring this place down, because we don't want this place to, you know, continue on forever. We want righteousness, man. What does that look like? Right? What does righteousness look like, man? We see what wickedness is. We see what's about to take place, you know? You know, why would you want that to continue, man? We want this place to go down. You know, and we see it going down, man. You know, we give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh Bashim Shah, because he's bringing this place down. You know? It's about fucking time, man. This place is ripe for destruction. You know? This place is ripe for destruction, man. Matter of fact, let me grab that. It's in Revelations. It's like it. Right. Right, because again, this is what's going to take place, man, because of the wickedness, right, that is being perpetrated in the earth, and Yahweh Bashim El Shai is going to destroy this place, man, right? Let's go to Isaiah, the 13th chapter, and verse 11, right, just being the point. It says, "And I will punish the world for their evil, and the wicked for their iniquity, and I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and I will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible." Right, Yahweh Bashim El Shai is going to destroy this place, man. Right, we understand that, you know, Jacob's trouble, right, the last two major prophecies have to happen before that destruction can come, you know, before, you know, the establishment of a righteous rulership can happen, right? Jacob's trouble, which we're in, right, which again, Esau is going to be coming down, you know, having great wrath, even harder than he is now, right? And then what? Immediately after that, what World War III, right? Because Esau's got an NWO he wants to push, right? He wants to make that RFID micro C mandatory. Right, which again, it has to be made mandatory before World War III can pop off, right? And then once World War III ultimately pops off, you know, which we're in the beginning of World War III now, you know, but the peak of World War III is those use of those ICBM nuclear missiles, man. You know, once that happens, and then guess what, man? Yahweh Shai gonna crack the sky simultaneously as those missiles are being shot off, deliver the elect, right? The elect being scarcely saved, you know, and then what, right? When the smoke clears, the elect are gonna come down. Right, apprehend these nations, right, these heathens, put them in captivity and build, you know, the kingdom of Yahweh Bashim El Shai. You know, that is what is going to take place, man, and we can't wait for that. You know, we can't wait for it, man. Lord, will we be part of the elect? And we're going to have that first dominion, right? We're going to be the first ones to see this place be built. You know, put these heathens into captivity and force them to build, you know, our kingdom, man. You know, and man, long awaited, right? We read in Revelations 13, and I'm just, you know, flowing through the spirit of Revelations 13 and verse 9. If any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints, and we're patiently waiting, man. Right? We can't wait, right, for this place to be, you know, completely, utterly, right, brought to desolation, right? America. Right, Esau, Edom to be taken out of the power seat, right, and us to be lifted up, right, to be put in that power seat, man. You know, to have rulership over those who had rulership over us, right, all the nations, man. Right, see, it's not gonna be a, you know, a happy-go-lucky, easy, skip-to-my-loo type time, man. No, right, your captivity, you heathens' captivity is gonna be far harder than ours, especially Esau, Edom. Right, you self-proclaimed so-called white folks, man. Y'all finna have it bad, man. You know? It's a lot. You know? Y'all finna have it bad, right? The scriptures say in Revelation, the 18th chapter, you know, Revelations 18, and verse 6, it says, "Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her, and double unto her, double according to her works in the cup which she has filled to her double." Right, your punishment is gonna be twice as bad as ours, man. Right, our punishment is, you know, 500 plus years, right? Hey, your slavery is gonna be 1,000 years, right? 1,000 years. And see, we've been under the captivity of mere mortals. You're gonna be under the captivity of immortals, right? Immortal beings, man. Right, we're never gonna be able to die. We're not gonna get weak, right? We're gonna, you know, for all eternity, take pleasure in everything that the Lord Yahweh Bashim El Shai has given unto us, man, including that special powers, man, the spiritual power. You know, being able to sit here and have laser beams come out of our eyes, right? Be able to, you know, not necessarily, you know, hold our breath when we're underwater. We're gonna be able to breathe in space, in the water. Brothers might have their castles built under the water. You know, you heathens better not drown. Type shit, man. You know? But that's what's coming. You know, for us. You know, and for those For those that take heed unto these words, man, those that take heed unto the prophets, the true prophets of Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushua. Again, right, where you got to be walking circumspectly, taking heed to what's going on around you, and taking heed to these words, man. But we understand only the elect, right, the remnant of the nation Israel are going to do so, right? Isaiah 10 and verse 20, it says, "And it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel, and such as are escaped of the house of Jacob, shall no more again stay upon him that smote them, right? But shall stay upon the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. The remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob, unto the mighty power." That's right, man. Right? Only a remnant is going to return. Only a remnant is going to take heed unto these words, man. Everyone else is not going to listen. Everyone else is going to be about their, go about their day, and if they do, right, identify as an Israelite, right? Majority of those who know that they're Israelites are going to be following these wayward ass camps, man. They're going to be following IUIC, right, which is a huge major camp. ISUPK, right, Sakari, Genesis, right, HODC, GOCC, BOY, WFI, and so on and so forth, right? I think there's a few that I didn't mention, so on and so forth, man. Right, and that's going to lead to their downfall, man, because those camps don't have the truth, right? Great Millstone, starting with our elder apostles on down, right? We have the truth, And as we read in Matthew the 7th chapter, right? Few be there that find it, right? That walk on the straight and narrow path and receive life. Everyone else is going to be walking on that broad and wide path, which leadeth unto destruction, lead to death. Let me jump to Matthew's 13 and verse 9. It says, "Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. And the disciples came and said unto him, Why speakest thou unto them in parables?" Right? Because Yahweh Shai, right, ultimately spoke unto the multitude, right, from a ship, right? That they were on the shore, the multitude were on the shore. He spoke from a ship, right? He spoke unto them in parables, And then the disciples came to him privately and was like, "Hey, well, why are you speaking to them in parables?" And verse 11, it says, "He answered and said unto them, Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given," right? It's not given to everybody to understand, right, what's about to take place, right, what's about to happen, right? And that Esau is finna be brought down, wicked rulership finna be brought down, and the righteous rulership is finna be established in its place, right? Most of these people, they don't understand that, nor can they receive it. These people are just thinking that, as life is right now, it's going to continue on that same way. It's going to continue on, and things really ain't going to change. When there's going to be a change of authority, right, that's going to take place. It says, for whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that he hath. Therefore speak I to them in parable, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. Right? They're not going to get it, right, until the very end, right? You go to Isaiah, where's that, 9 and 6, if I'm not mistaken. No, 6 and 9, Salakia. Isaiah 6 and verse 9, it says, "And he said, Go and tell this people, hear ye indeed, but understand not, and see ye indeed, but perceive not. Make the heart of this people fat, and make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and be converted and be healed." Right? So the Lord ultimately blinded them, right? The Lord blinded them, right? So that they don't get this truth, right? Because again, right, when you go into that word mystery, right? Because as he said in Matthew 13, right, it's unto you is given to know the mystery of the kingdom, and not to them, right? When you go into that word mystery, goes into the Greek word mysterion, which goes into what? Those who are initiated. The initiated ones, man, right? Not mere mortals, right? Not regular people, right? But those who have been initiated, those who have been foreordained to receive this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, right? Verse 11, it says, "Then said I, Lord, how long? And he answered, Until the cities be wasted without inhabitant, and the houses without man, and the land be utterly desolate." So at the last minute, right, when destruction is going to come, that's when they'll get it, right? But in this current present time, it's not meant for everybody to receive this knowledge, man, right? I'll continue on, right, going back to it, Matthew 13 and 13, right? So therefore I speak unto them. Again, he was quoting Isaiah, right? We just went and read it, right? Yahweh Shai was quoting Isaiah, right? It says, therefore speak I to them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. And in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which saith, by hearing ye shall hear, and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see, and shall not perceive. For this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are full, it's like in their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and should understand with their hearts, and should be converted, and I shall heal them. Again, right? Yahweh Shai quoting Isaiah the 6th chapter, right? It says, but blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. Right? So he's speaking to the disciples, right? Blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. Because it is a blessing, right? It says, for verily I say unto you that many prophets and righteous men have desired to see those things which ye see and have not seen them, and to hear those things which ye hear and have not heard them, right? Many people would ultimately pay millions and trillions of dollars, right, to receive this knowledge. But see, again, Yahweh Bashim Shai is only giving this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding to a certain amount of people, man. So if the Yahweh Bashim Shai has ultimately guided you to watch these videos, right, and through the Spirit guided you to watch these videos and understand and to fear, right, what's about to happen, hey, take heed, man. Continue to stay on your grind, stay on your watch, because we're in some very, approaching some very perilous times, man. Esau is moving. When it comes to him, utilizing or setting up or introducing certain laws, bills, and policies that allow him to do, exactly what he wants to do, right? To try to establish his NWO, man. And again, the warning is continuing to go out, through the grace and mercy of Yahweh Bashim Yahushua, man. Take heed unto what's being spoken unto you, man. Let me grab this. A couple more precepts. This is Acts 3:23. It says, and it shall come to pass that every soul which will not hear that prophet shall be destroyed from among the people. So destruction is coming. And again, we know that Esau, Yahweh Bashim Yahshua is going to utilize Esau, Edom to do so, right? Because we understand that pursuing in Psalm 17:13, Esau is the sword of the Lord, right? The wicked is the sword of the Lord, right? And the Lord's going to use them against you Israelites, man, because you Israelites want to continue to be wicked, right? You want to continue to commit adultery. You want to continue to eat shrimp, crab, lobster, pork, right? You want to continue to, commit murder, right? A lot of these young ass, a lot of, we call them YNs, right? Young niggas, right? Out here committing murder, being effeminate, so on and so forth, man. You got a lot of these celebrities, everything, all these people that got some type of money, man. They had to do some mo shit in order to get that money, all of those who are wicked, right, that don't follow the law, statutes, commandments to the best of their ability in these times, and trust and believe and have faith in Yahweh Bashim Yahshua, the Lord is going to destroy, right? But the elect of the nation of Israel, the Lord Yahweh Bashim Yahshua is going to protect and continue to guide, and deliver in the times to come, right? This is Isaiah chapter 55 and verse 6. It says, seek ye Yahweh while ye may be found, call ye upon him while he is near, right? And how do you seek the Lord, right? By getting into the scriptures, watching the videos, right? Going out to the highways and byways and getting built up through the Spirit by the men of the Lord, right? It says, let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts, and let him return unto Yahweh, and he will have mercy upon him into our power, for he will abundantly pardon, right? And we need that mercy, right? Psalms 32nd chapter. It says what? A psalm of David, Mashil, right? Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. And again, we've all committed sins worthy of death, right? So we all deserve to be put to death, but there was something that, the elder Tazabah, right, the second in command here, in the Arizona camp, he said something yesterday at camp, and he sat there and said that we're all paying for our access, right, to the tree of immortality, right? To have right to the tree of immortality is a read in Revelation 22nd chapter, right? Yahweh Shai, said, matter of fact, let's grab that. So I quoted Revelation 22nd chapter. In verse 12, it says, behold, second chapter. So like, yes, hold on, let me, right. Yeah, Revelation 2:24. 22 and 14 says, "Blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life, and may enter in through the gates into the city." Right. So we're all, paying for, right, through our, our obedience, through our suffering, or our sacrifices, that we do for Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua. We're all paying for our right to the tree of life, man. By again, again, going through the sufferings, right, keeping a good mind toward Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua while we're doing it, while we're going through those sufferings, right, making those sacrifices that are needed, getting rid of those, those vices, those crutches, that we utilize in the world, which ultimately allow us to be comfortable, which when you're comfortable, that doesn't allow for growth, right? When you're uncomfortable, that's where growth ultimately, is cultivated, man, So we're going through, again, doing what we got to do, right, in order to be able to receive, the kingdom, right, the tree of life, man, It's what we got to do, man, If not, hey, we're going to be put to death, man, Isaiah 55 and verse, right, again, Slaki, let me go back to Psalms, the 32nd chapter, right? Verse 2, "Blessed is the man unto whom Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua imputeth not iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no guile." That's right. Right? We need that mercy, right? The sure mercies of David we need, right, to be pardoned. So we got to continue to, as the scriptures say, let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. So continue to, pray for forgiveness, continue to, cast off that old man and seek Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua to the best of your ability before it's too late. We understand that the elect is going to do that, and they're going to be delivered, right? Lord will be part of that number, man. We got to continue to do that every single day, man. But that's all I got, man. Lord will is edifying. Lord will straight to the point. I'm going to give all praise, honor, glory unto Yahweh, B'Hashem, Yahushua, B'Hashem, Rakak Kadash, double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone. Till next time, I say shalom.